Sons of the Forest has been out for over 3 months now, and we've seen a hell of a lot of changes since the game's release. Since it's been in early access, we've seen 5 awesome patches, a bunch of hotfixes which have all added loads of new content and fixed masses and masses of bugs, which is great. The early access road so far has been absolutely phenomenal, and this game is only going to get better. But did they make one critical mistake by adding too much to the main storyline at the start of early access? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. But today there will be some spoilers in the video and some footage of the actual storyline and storyline elements. So if you haven't finished the game and got to the end of the story yet, then I'd recommend you come back to this video at a time when you've actually done that, because I don't want to ruin the game for you, especially the ending of the storyline. Now, if you are a fan of Sons of the Forest, subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video and stick around for much more content. We cover it here every Thursday at 9 PM UK time. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not critiquing the storyline. I think the storyline was really quite cool, apart from the very odd ending, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. Now, the game overall is absolutely stunning, with absolutely amazing views, a brilliant island, and for an early access title, there is quite a lot to do. Now, when it comes to the storyline, though, that is a little bit of a different one. The storyline is great, it is rich, there is a lot there, especially if you look between the lines. You find the paperwork, you read the documentation that has been added throughout previous patches. But not just that, the actual main storyline, the obvious elements that are in your face, there is quite a lot there. And a lot of that has been there since launch. Granted, there have been a few things added throughout the various patches that we've seen so far, and I assume they're going to continue to add more storyline and more detail. We've already seen a lot of iterations of this, especially with the dead cultists and the found footage, which I think is going to show an absolutely awesome storyline when it's all put together, and it will tie in quite heavily with the main story, as we've already seen some elements of it doing so. Along the way, we've also learnt a hell of a lot about Hank and his golf balls, which, I mean, it's Hank and his golf balls. There's too much about Hank and his golf balls, but I think for the early access side of things, little things like that would have been great. But adding in those main story elements, I think too early, is a little bit of a rough patch for an early access title. Now, I think this is mainly because a lot of the players have stemmed from the original Forest, and not from just the early access days. You've got to remember that the original Forest was launched into consoles, and by the time it was a mass popularity boost, it was already almost heavily complete. So there was a lot of those story elements in there that people jumped on, they did that survival aspect, and they did the storyline, and then they stopped playing the game. Granted, when it comes to survival, there are a large number of players that play the survival games just for that aspect and not for the storyline. So they'll come in, they'll build, they'll survive, and they'll go for hundreds and hundreds of days and hundreds and even thousands of hours, which is the beauty of a survival game. But they are knocking out a core part of their audience by adding so much of the storyline towards the start of early access, especially when it comes to the ending of the storyline. Because a lot of players that jumped in will jump in, they'll play the storyline, and then they might not come back for the subsequent updates unless they've got major storyline improvements. So we have seen with some of the patches, we have added additional storyline elements, such as the giant demon and Mr. and Mrs. Puffton, along with loads of other little elements here and there. But just adding those elements, I think, may have actually turned away some of that core audience, the audience that come from playing the original Forest towards the end of its development cycle, where the storyline was in full effect, and they've come here to try that. They want to get in, they want to play that storyline element, and then they won't really come back. Now, when we look at Steam charts, you'll see that the all-time peak was over 400,000 players, and that is an absolutely phenomenal number. But it has been in decline ever since, but that is normal, especially for an early access title. Players will jump in, try out loads of good stuff, and then potentially come back later. But as I said, by giving you so much of the storyline, especially the ending of the storyline, in that first iteration of the game, you are alienating that massive chunk of players, which is a massive shame. But still, the amount of average daily players is relatively good, and they are doing brilliant when it comes to the updates. But as I say, alienating a part of the community that is here to enjoy that storyline that continues on from the first game and sort of figure out what was going on there and try and get the Easter eggs. I know there was a lot of people that wanted to see what could tie into the original storyline, and there was a lot of people that just wanted to play it for the story. And then obviously you do have that hardcore element that really want to play it for the grinding and the building, which is something that they've done absolutely brilliantly. The building in the game is so much fun, and with each update, the additions that are being added to that aspect are brilliant. So that does keep a big chunk of players playing, especially the co-op aspects as well. Players that come together and build a community and just hunt cannibals together. That is another big core aspect. But those guys that were here for the storyline, they might not come back at all. Hopefully they come back a little bit later on, maybe when it releases into full launch, or towards the end of early access when we've seen a load more story updates. There have been so many story updates. Like the original opening sequence, you didn't have Virginia on the laptop, you just had Mr. and Mrs. Puffton. And then when we go into the actual dining room there was nothing really in there, apart from weird aluminium dude / woman, I'm not quite sure there, that jumps through the window, which I actually missed on my first playthrough of the game. And then obviously Hank and his golf balls, which has been a big reoccurring theme. But then finally they added Mr. and Mrs. Puffton into that dining hall. But once again, if you'd already completed the storyline, you don't have a reason to go back there, so you might not even know that. Especially if you're not reading patch notes, not watching videos, and you're just in it for sort of that building aspect, and you're enjoying the story as you find it. If you've already been there, you might not go back, so therefore you'll miss that big element, which I think is a shame. And then later on down the line as well, we see more being added when it comes to the cultists, which they are pretty much really cool set pieces with a little bit of storyline tied into them, especially when it comes to, once again, those found footage tapes that we've been seeing added. I'm assuming they're going to continue to add one to each update. Hopefully, eventually that will unravel a bigger, more interesting story. And then they bring in the giant demon later down the line, which that was actually quite cool. But that is pretty much an endgame boss fight. So I think they could have added that in and left that there, rather than adding that actual ending sequence where you either board the chopper or you do not board the chopper. Because once some people have done that, they'll go, great, I've completed the game now. Let's get a couple of achievements, bish bash bosh, I'm done. I don't want to play it anymore. So leaving that segment out, I think, would have really helped bring in those players and keep a lot of that storyline gameplay relevant. So sort of working from the beginning of the game and adding the storyline in at the start, and then with each subsequent update add a little bit more to the storyline, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then fine-tune the sort of ending, and then get to the ending of the storyline towards early access. Now I know a lot of people may absolutely hate that, but I think storyline, as good as it is for Sons of the Forest and The Forest, it's not imperative for an early access title. There are a lot of early access games out there that don't have a storyline yet. They've just got those core mechanics and they're building and adding more features as they go. And I don't think there would have been anything wrong with that from End Night. But there's probably a lot of people that would disagree with that and enjoy the fact that we got the story so early on. Which is great if you did. I enjoyed the story, don't get me wrong. I just think that adding so much of the story early on could have potentially hurt the amount of players that would come back to play the game at a later date. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Do you enjoy Sons of the Forest story? Do you think they added too much too soon? Or do you think they haven't added enough yet? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I greatly appreciate it. If you have enjoyed today's video, drop a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and stick around for much more Sons of the Forest content. For now though, I've been Wired. You guys have been awesome. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon with some more Sons of the Forest.